Section 27 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks. Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 27. November 1769, Part 2. 1769, November 13. Rainy and blowing weather today, so we did not go ashore. Indeed, there was little temptation, for we had got by much the greatest number, or perhaps all the plants, that the season afforded. 1769, November 14. But middling weather. As we were resolved to stay no longer here, we all went ashore, the boats to get as much celery and oysters as possible, Dr. Solander and myself to get as many green plants as possible, of sea stock for finishing sketches, etc. So an enormous number of all these articles came on board. Dr. Solander, who was today in a cove different from that I was in, saw the natives catch many lobsters, in a most simple manner. They walked among the rocks at low water, about middle deep in water, and still felt about with their feet till they felt one, on which they dived down and constantly brought him up. I do not know whether I have before mentioned these lobsters, but we have had them in tolerable plenty in almost every place we have been in, and they are certainly the largest and best I have ever eat. 1769, November 15. Little wind, and that foul. Sail, however. Several canoes were on board, and in one of them Torava, who said that as soon as ever we are gone, he must go to his ipa or fort, for the friends of the man who was killed on the 9th threatened to revenge themselves upon him, as being a friend to us. 1769, November 16. Foul wind yesterday. Many islands were seen, but neither the main or them appeared at all fertile or well inhabited. Only one town was seen all day and no people. Indeed, we were rather too far off. 1769, November 17. Foul wind and blowing fresh, so that we did not come near enough to the land to make any observations. 1769, November 18. Fine weather and fair wind today repaid us for yesterday's tossing. The country appeared pleasant and well wooded. At 7 we were abreast of a remarkable bare point, jutting far into the sea. On it stood many people who seemed to take but little notice of us, but talked together with much earnestness. In about 1/2 an hour we saw canoes put off almost at the same time from several different places, and come towards us, on which these people also put off a small canoe they had with them, and came likewise towards us. She soon came up with us, and had in her 20 people, and soon after another with 35. They sung the song of defiance as usual, which we took very little notice of. In about 1/2 an hour they threw 3 or 4 stones on board, and then departed toward the shore. We thought we were quite clear of them, but they soon returned as if inclined, which I believe is the common policy of these people, to provoke us to show them whether we had arms or not superior to theirs. Tupaya, who I believe guessed that they were coming to attack us, immediately went upon the poop and talked to them a good deal, telling them what if they provoked us we should do, and how easily we could in a moment destroy them all. They answered him in their usual cant, "Come ashore only, and we will kill you all." "Well," said Tupaya, "but while we are at sea you have no business with us. The sea is our property as much as yours." Such reasoning from an Indian, who had not the smallest hint from any of us, surprised me much, and the more as these were sentiments I never had before heard him give a hint about in his own case. All his preaching, however, had little effect on them, for they soon renewed their stone attack, on which a musket ball was fired through one of their boats, on which they dropped astern and left us. At night the ship was in a place which some people conjectured to be a channel betwixt an island and the main, others a deep bay, where she came to an anchor. 1769, November 19. This morn 2 canoes came from the land, who said they knew Torava, and called Tupaya by his name. We took some of them on board, who behaved very well. Afterwards canoes came from the other side of the bay, who likewise mentioned Torava's name, and sent a young man into the ship, who told us that he was the old man's grandson. We never suspected him to have had so much influence. In the evening it came on thick and misty, so we came to an anchor, not a little pleased to find ourselves, at least, in a peaceable country. 1769, November 20. Weather thick and hazy. We had yesterday resolved to employ this day in examining the bay, so at daybreak we set out in the boats. A fresh breeze of wind soon carried us to the bottom of the bay, where we found a very fine river, broad as the Thames, at Greenwich, though not quite so deep. There was, however, water enough for vessels of more than a middling size, and a bottom of mud so soft that nothing could possibly take damage by running ashore. About a mile up this was an Indian town built upon a small bank of dry sand, but totally surrounded by deep mud, so much so that I believe they meant it a defence. The people came out in flocks upon the banks, inviting us in. They had heard of us from our good friend Torava. We landed, and while we stayed, they were most perfectly civil, as indeed they have always been where we were known, but never where we were not. After this visit we proceeded, and soon met with another town, with but few inhabitants. Above this the banks of the river were completely clothed with the finest timber my eyes ever beheld. Of a tree we had seen before, but only at a distance in Poverty Bay and Hawke's Bay. Thick woods of it were everywhere upon the banks, every tree as straight as a pine, and of immense size. Still the higher we came, the more numerous they were. About 2 leagues from the mouth we stopped, and went ashore. Our first business was to measure one of these trees. The woods were swampy, so we could not range far. We found one, however, by no means the largest we had seen, which was feet in circumference and in height without a branch. But what was most remarkable was that it, as well as many more that we saw, carried its thickness so truly up to the very top, that I dare venture to affirm that the top, where the lowest branch took its rise, was not a foot less in diameter than where we measured, which was about 8 feet from the ground. We cut down a young one of these trees. The wood proved heavy and solid, too much so for mast, but would make the finest plank in the world, and might possibly, by some art, be made light enough for mast as pitch pine in America, to which our carpenter likened this timber, is said to be lightened by tapping. As far as this, the river had kept its depth, and very little decreased even in breadth. The captain was so much pleased with it that he resolved to call it the Thames. It was now time for us to return. The tide turning downwards gave us warning, so away we went, and got out of it into the bay before it was dark. We rowed for the ship as fast as we could, but night overtook us before we could get within some miles of it. It blew fresh, with showers of rain. In this situation we rowed till near 12, and then gave over, and running under the land came to a grappling, and all went to sleep as well as we could. 1769, November 21. Before daybreak we set out again. It still blew fresh with mizzling rain and fog, so that it was an hour after day before we got a sight of the ship. However, we made shift to get on board by 7, tired enough, and lucky it was for us that we did, for before 9 it blew a fresh gale, so that our boat could not have rowed ahead, so that had we been out, we must have either gone ashore or sheltered ourselves under it. Before evening, however, it moderated, so that we got under way with the ebb tide, but did little or nothing. 1769, November 22. This morn we weighed with the ebb, but breeze was so light that the captain went into the boat and Dr. Solander with him. There were many canoes about the ship, with which I traded for their clothes, arms, etc., of which I had got few, so I stayed on board. They sold chiefly for paper. In the course of this commerce, one young man, who was upon deck, stole a half-minute glass, which was in the binnacle, and was catched attempting to go off with it. The first lieutenant took it into his head to flog him for his crime. He was accordingly seized, but when they attempted to tie him to the shrouds, the Indians on board made much resistance. I heard it and came upon deck. They then began to call for their arms, which were handed them out of the boats, and one canoe attempted to come up the ship's side. Just then Tupaya came upon deck. They ran to him immediately. He assured them that their friend would not be killed, he would only be whipped, on which they were well satisfied. He endured the discipline, and as soon as he was let go, an old man, who perhaps was his father, beat him very soundly, and sent him down into the canoes, into which they all went and dropped astern, saying that they were afraid to come any more near us. They ventured, however, at last, but stayed a very short time, promising, however, at their departure to return with fish, which they never performed. 1769, November 23. Very light breezes. We have got but little as yet by tiding. In the morn 2 small canoes came off, and promised to return at night with fish, but did not. 1769, November 24. Strong breeze off the land, so we soon got clear of the bay. Land in the morn appeared unfruitful. Few or no houses were seen. In the evening large sands which extended some way into the country in little hills, as have been seen in England. At night we came to an anchor in a small open bay. Our fishing lines were tried, and we soon caught a large number of fish, which were called by the seamen sea bream, as many as I believe the ship's company could eat in 2 days. 1769, November 25. The country had a tolerably good appearance. In the morn some straggling houses and 3 or 4 fortified towns were in sight, near which was a large quantity of cultivation. In the evening 7 large canoes came off, carrying about 200 Indians. 2 of them, who said they had heard of us, came on board and received our presents. This did not, however, hinder some of their companions from cheating as usual, by offering to trade and keeping what they had got without sending up what they had offered. Our usual punishment was inflicted: small shot, which made the offender immediately relinquish his prize, an old pair of black breeches, which he threw into the water on seeing a second musket presented. His companions, however, as soon as they thought themselves out of our reach, began as usual to defy us, which made us think it necessary to show them what we could do, a conduct surely most right when it can be done without hurting them. Muskets were fired near them, which made them draw a little farther off. A round shot was then fired over their heads, on which they all set off for the shore most stoutly. 1769, November 26. 2 small canoes came off early in the morn and told us that they had heard of yesterday's adventure. They came on board and traded quietly for whatever they had. Soon after 2 larger ones came from a distance. They called the others to them, and then all came up together to the ship. The strangers were numerous and appeared rich. Their canoes were well carved and ornamented, and they had with them many weapons of patu-patus, of stone, and whale bones, which they value much. They had also ribs of whales, of which we had often seen imitations in wood, carved and ornamented with tufts of dog's hair. The people themselves were browner than to the southward, as indeed they have been ever since we came to Upuraj, and they had a much larger quantity of amoko, or black stains, upon their bodies and faces. Almost universally they had a broad spiral on each buttock, and many had their thighs almost entirely black, small lines only being left untouched, so that they looked like striped breeches. In this particular, I mean amoko, almost every different tribe seemed to vary their customs. We have some days seen canoes where every man has been almost covered with it, and at the same time others where scarce a man has had a spot except his lips blacked, which seems to be always essential. These people would not part with any of their arms, etc., for any price we could offer. At last, however, one produced an axe of talk, and offered it for cloth. It was given, and the canoe immediately put off with it. A musket ball was fired over their heads, on which they immediately came back and returned the cloth, but soon after put off and went ashore. In the afternoon other canoes came off, and from some inattention of the officers were suffered to cheat, unpunished and unfrightened. This put one of the midshipmen, who had suffered, upon a droll, though rather mischievous, revenge. He got a fishing line, and when the canoe was close to the ship, hove the lead at the man who had cheated, with so good success that he fastened the hook into his backside, on which he pulled with all his might, and the Indian kept back. So the hook soon broke in the shank, leaving its beard in his backside. No very agreeable legacy. 1769, November 27. Light breeze. Several canoes came off and traded for fish, but were most abominably saucy, continually threatening us. At last they began to heave stones with more courage than any boats we had seen. This made it necessary to punish them. The captain went upon the poop, where they immediately threw at him. He levelled a gun loaded with small shot at the man who held a stone in his hand, in the very action of throwing, and struck him. He sunk down so immediately into the canoe that we suspected he was materially hurt. This, however, did not prevent another canoe from coming up with stones in their hands, who met another load of small shot, at about 50 yards distant, which struck several of them, and at once stopped their speed. The 2 canoes which had been fired at went immediately for the shore. The others dropped astern, and we left them behind. The land appeared rocky and full of islands. The continent behind them rose in a gradual slope, and seemed fertile. Some cultivation was in sight. In the even, foul wind. 1769, November 28. Foul wind continued, and this morn the ship was 2 leagues at least to leeward of yesterday. The continent rose in gentle hills, but did not appear so fertile when near it as it did at a distance. Several large ipas were in sight, one the largest we have seen, to appearance, far inland. 1769, November 29. Wind as foul as ever, and the ship moved more to leeward, so we resolved to bear away for a bay which we had passed. We did so, and by 10 came to an anchor in a most spacious and well-sheltered harbour, or rather collection of harbours, almost innumerable, formed by islands. Canoes crowded upon us from all quarters, so that soon we had 37 large and small about us. The people in them traded very fairly for what they had, and showed much fear of us, especially if they saw anything like a gun, which they were well acquainted with. They became, however, soon a little more bold, and while we were at dinner, one of them went to the buoy, which they attempted to tow away. A musket was fired over them without effect, and small shot at them, but they were too far off for that to take effect. A ball was then fired at them, which was thought to strike one of them, as they immediately threw out the buoy, which by this time they had got into their canoe. A round shot was then fired over them, which struck the water, and then went ashore. 2 or 3 canoes landed immediately, and the men ran about on the beach as if in search of it. After this we called to them, and in a little time they returned to the ship. By this time she was properly moored, and the boats out, so we set out for the shore. At our parting from the ship not a canoe stirred, which we judged a good sign. But no sooner had we set foot on the shore, about 3/4 of a mile from the ship, but every canoe put off in a moment, and pulled towards us. We were in a sandy cove behind the 2 heads, of which the most of them landed, only 1 or 2 in sight. Out of these they came running with every man his arms, others appeared on the tops of the hills, and numbers from behind each head of the cove, so that we were in a moment surrounded by, the gentlemen in the ship say, 500 or 600 men, though we, I believe, never saw more than 200 of them. We now every man expected to be attacked, but did not choose to begin hostilities, so the captain and myself marched up to meet them. They crowded a good deal, but did not offer to meddle with us, though every man had his arms almost lifted to a strike. We brought them towards the party, and made a line signing to them that they were not to pass it. They did not at first, but by this time a party from the other side had come up, and mixed with our people. They now began to sing their war song, but committed no hostility till 3 stepped to each of our boats and attempted to draw them ashore. It was now time to fire. We whose guns were loaded with small shot did so, which drove them back. One man attempted to rally them. He who was not 20 yards from us came down towards us, waving his patu-patu, and calling to his companions. Dr. Solander, whose gun was not discharged, fired at him, on which he too ran. They now got upon rising ground about us, from whence we dislodged them by firing musket balls, none of which took effect rather than frightening them. In this way we were about 1/4 of an hour, resolving to maintain our ground, when the ship had brought her broadside to bear and fired at the Indians who were on the tops of the hills. The balls went quite over them, notwithstanding which they went off, and at last left us our cove quite to ourselves, so that the muskets were laid down upon the ground, and all hands employed in gathering celery, which was here very plentiful. An old Indian now appeared who had been on board in the morn, with 2 more. They came immediately to us and proved to be his wife and brother. He said that another brother of his was struck with a small shot, and asked whether he would die. We told him no, and gave him a musket ball with some small shot, telling him it was the latter with which he was struck, but if they again attacked us we would shoot them with the former, which would infallibly kill them. After this we went into the boats and rowed to another cove in the same island, near which was a hill from whence we might have a good view of the bay. We climbed up it, and from thence saw that the bay we were in was indeed a most surprising place. It was full of an innumerable quantity of islands, forming as many harbours, which must be as smooth as mill-ponds, as they landlock one another numberless times. Everywhere round us we could see large Indian towns, houses, and cultivations. We had certainly seen no place near so populous as this one was very near us, from whence several Indians came to us, taking however great pains to show us that they were unarmed. They accompanied us down to the boat. Night coming on, we went on board, carrying much celery, the only plant of any use even to us, for of all the places I have landed in this was the only one which did not produce one new vegetable. 1769, November 30. Several canoes came off to the ship very early, but sold little or nothing. Indeed, no merchandise that we can show them seems to take with them. Our island cloth, which used to be so much esteemed, has now entirely lost its value. They have for some days told us that they have it ashore and showed us small pieces in their ears, which they said was of their own manufacture. This at once accounts for their having been once so fond of it, and now setting so little value upon it. Towards noon, however, they sold a little dried fish, for paper chiefly, or very white island cloth. Among other things, they told us that the man who was shot with the small shot on the 27th was dead. 3 shot, they say, struck his eye, and I suppose found an easy passage to his brain. In the even we went ashore upon the continent. The people received us very civilly, and as tame as we could wish. One general observation I here set down, that they always, after one night's consideration, have acknowledged our superiority, but hardly before. I have often seen a man whose next neighbour was wounded or killed by our shot not give himself the trouble to inquire how or by what means he was hurt, so that at the time of their attacks they, I believe, work themselves up into a kind of artificial courage, which does not allow them time to think much. End of section 27, part 2 of November, 1769.